It started as a favor, a simple trip to help my friend move into his new apartment. The place was old, a brick building with a narrow stairwell and an outdated, musty smell that made it feel like it had been forgotten in time. He got a great deal, something about the last tenant breaking the lease suddenly and leaving in the middle of the night. That should have been the first red flag, but I didn't think much of it then. The first night, we unpacked boxes, drank cheap beer, and laughed about the terrible paint job in the hallway. The air felt thick, but I chalked it up to dust and exhaustion. Around midnight, I crashed on the couch while he set up his bed in the only bedroom. The apartment was silent, apart from the occasional groan of the building settling. I woke up to the sound of whispering. I wasn't sure if I had actually woken up or if I was in that strange in-between state, but the voices were distinct, soft, almost melodic, overlapping each other in hushed, frantic tones. I lay there frozen, my eyes on the ceiling, willing myself to move. A shadow passed by the hallway. My stomach clenched. "Hey," I called out, my voice hoarse. The whispering stopped. A few seconds later, I heard my friend shift in bed. His door creaked open. He stepped into the hallway, rubbing his eyes. "Did you hear that?" I asked, sitting up. He stared at me for a moment, then shook his head. "Go back to sleep, man." I wanted to believe him, so I did. The next morning, we laughed about it. I told him his apartment was haunted, but he shrugged it off. "Probably neighbors. These walls are thin," he said, tapping the plaster. That night, I stayed over again. Something about the place unsettled me, but I didn't want to admit it. I woke up at 3:12 a.m. At first, I didn't know what had startled me awake. The air felt different, heavy, like the silence was pressing down on me. My breath came short and shallow. I turned my head toward the hallway. There was someone standing there. Not my friend. It was a tall, thin figure, barely visible in the dim glow from the streetlight filtering through the blinds. It didn't move. It just stood there, its head tilted slightly to one side, as if watching me. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I blinked, and the figure was gone. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I convinced my friend to go out for breakfast. I wasn't going to tell him about what I saw. I didn't want to sound crazy. But as we sat in the diner, he suddenly said, "I keep waking up to my closet door being open." I stopped mid-bite. "You don't sleep with it open?" He shook his head. "I always close it. But the past 2 nights, I wake up and it's wide open." A chill ran down my spine. "Maybe it's just settling," he added quickly, forcing a laugh. "Old building and all." I nodded, but I didn't believe it. That night, I stayed again, but this time, I slept with a knife under my pillow. I didn't wake up at 3:12 a.m. I woke up at 2:58 a.m. There was a noise from the bedroom, a rhythmic creaking, like a rocking chair shifting back and forth. I didn't want to move, but my body acted on its own. I sat up slowly, my heart hammering. The creaking continued, steady and deliberate. Then I heard something else. A whisper. Not like before. This was different. It was close. Right behind me. A breath touched the back of my neck. I jumped off the couch, spun around, but there was nothing there. The whispering had stopped. The bedroom door was open. I could see my friend lying in bed, his back to me. But something was off. His breathing was too slow, too unnatural. I took a step forward. The closet door was open. A sliver of darkness stretched into the room. My pulse pounded in my ears. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it at the closet. For half a second, I saw something move. Then the door slammed shut. My friend gasped and sat up. His eyes were wide, panicked. "Did you see it?" he shouted. I couldn't speak. I grabbed my things, and we left the apartment that night. He never went back. We never spoke about it again. 2 weeks later, he got a call from the landlord. They had found something in the closet. A handprint. Not on the inside of the door. On the ceiling. Story 2. The house had been abandoned for decades. At least, that's what the locals said. Every town has one. An old place left to rot, weighed down by rumors and whispers of something sinister. This one sat at the edge of a dried-up lake, its windows dark, its paint peeling, a relic of something that should have been forgotten. I wouldn't have gone near it if it weren't for my brother. "Come on, man, it's just a house," he had said, his usual smirk in place. One night, just to say we did it. I should have said no. Instead, I stood in front of that house with a flashlight in one hand and a sleeping bag slung over my shoulder, watching as he forced the rusted lock open with a crowbar. The door groaned like it hadn't been touched in years. Inside, the air was thick, stale. The floor creaked beneath our weight, dust swirling in the dim light of our flashlights. The living room was almost untouched, furniture covered in white sheets, a fireplace filled with old, crumbling logs, a single picture frame face down on the mantel. "I don't like this," I muttered, but my brother was already moving deeper inside. We set up in what used to be a dining room. The long table was still there, though one of the chairs had been knocked over. A massive chandelier hung above us, swaying slightly even though there was no breeze. "Something about this place feels weird," I said. "It's just old," my brother shot back. "You're acting like a kid." The hours dragged. We played cards, cracked a few beers, tried to ignore the silence pressing in from all sides. I kept glancing at the dark hallway leading to the rest of the house, half expecting something to step out. Then, around midnight, we heard it. A single, deliberate knock. It came from upstairs. We both froze, staring at each other, waiting for an explanation. Wind. A loose board? Maybe an animal? Another knock. Then another. A slow, steady rhythm, like someone knocking on a door. "Old pipes," my brother whispered, but his face was pale. I shook my head. "That's not pipes." Then, something changed. The knocks weren't coming from upstairs anymore. They were coming from the ceiling, right above us. Something was in the house. I grabbed my flashlight, aiming it at the ceiling, but all I saw was cracked plaster. My brother stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Let's go," he said, his voice tight. I didn't argue. We grabbed our things, moving fast. The air felt thick, heavy, pressing against my skin like unseen hands trying to hold me in place. As we stepped into the main hall, I chanced one last look behind me, and then I saw it. At the top of the staircase, just barely visible in the dark, stood a figure. No face, no features, just a tall, thin outline, its head tilted slightly, watching us. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My body locked up, every muscle frozen in place. My brother grabbed my arm, yanking me forward. "Don't look at it," he hissed. We ran. Out the door. Down the front steps. Onto the cracked pavement of the driveway. The night was cold, sharp. The silence outside was deafening. I turned back, half expecting to see it standing in the doorway, but the house was still. Empty. But then, the porch light flickered on, and a shadow passed behind the front window. We never spoke about it. Never told anyone what we saw. But sometimes, late at night, I dream about that house. And in my dreams, the knocking never stops. Story 3. It was supposed to be a temporary job, 3 weeks tops. That's what they told me when I signed the contract. All I had to do was watch over a storage facility overnight, sit in the office, make sure no one was messing around with the units, and call the police if anything seemed off. It sounded easy, but I should have known that no job pays that well without a reason. The first night was quiet. The facility sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by nothing but empty lots and abandoned warehouses. The rows of storage units stretched into the darkness, each one identical, locked up tight. At midnight, the radio crackled. At first, I thought it was just static, but then I heard it, whispering. Faint, unintelligible. I adjusted the frequency, but it didn't stop. It just got clearer. "Let me out." I turned the radio off. The second night, the security monitors started glitching. The cameras showed nothing but static except for one, the feed from Unit 406. That one showed movement. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. There was no one renting 406. It was supposed to be empty, but something inside was shifting. The metal door rattled, shaking violently for a few seconds before falling still. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the camera went black. I told myself it was a system malfunction. I even wrote it up in the logbook, convincing myself that the motion sensor was faulty. But by the third night, I couldn't keep lying to myself. At exactly 2:37 a.m., the knocking started. Not from the office door, not from outside, from inside the storage facility. A steady, pounding rhythm, echoing through the rows of units. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped outside, and the cold hit me like a slap. The air smelled stale, like rust and damp concrete. The knocking continued. I followed the sound, weaving between the units, my breath clouding in the night air. The door was shaking. Something was inside. I hesitated, my fingers brushing the lock. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to walk away, but I needed to know. I unlocked it. The door groaned as I pulled it open, the metal screeching against the tracks. The unit was empty, or at least, it should have been. But the walls, there were scratches. Deep, jagged, overlapping claw marks covering every inch of the metal. Some fresh, some old, like something had been trying to dig its way out for years. Then I heard breathing. Behind me. Slow. Shallow. I turned. Nothing. Just rows of storage units stretching into the dark. The light above me flickered. Then I saw the footprints. Leading from the unit. Leading toward me. But there was no one there. I ran. Back to the office. Locked the door. Checked the monitors. Unit 406 was closed. But something stood outside the office door. Not a person. Not even a shadow. Just an absence. A shape that didn't belong. Darker than the night itself. The radio crackled again. Let me out. I quit the next morning. Didn't ask for my paycheck. Didn't leave a notice. And I never went back. Story 4. The tunnel had been closed for years. Everyone in town knew it. An old service tunnel beneath the city, sealed off after an accident decades ago. The official story was structural instability, a collapse that left it too dangerous to repair. But that didn't stop people from talking. Stories floated around, whispers of workers who went in and never came out, of something moving in the dark long after the last crew abandoned it. I wouldn't have gone near it if it weren't for David. "Come on," he said, grinning as he held up the bolt cutters. "One quick trip inside, just to see how far it goes." I should have said no. Instead, I found myself standing at the mouth of the tunnel at midnight, the rusted gate lying twisted at our feet. The air smelled damp, thick with mildew and something metallic, like old blood. David went in first, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. The tunnel stretched forward, curving slightly downward, its walls lined with rusted pipes that dripped with moisture. The deeper we went, the colder it got. And then we heard it. A sound from deep within the tunnel. Not an echo. Not a drip of water. Breathing. Slow, ragged, in and out. We stopped, listening. The flashlight trembled in my grip. "There's someone in here," I whispered. David shook his head. "No one's been down here in years." Then the breathing changed. It wasn't just breathing anymore. It was mimicking us. I inhaled. It inhaled. I exhaled. It exhaled. David took a step forward. So did it. Not in front of us. Behind us. We turned. The entrance was gone. Only blackness stretched behind us, thick and swallowing, like the tunnel itself had shifted, closing us in. David's flashlight flickered. I felt something move in the dark. I didn't see it, but I felt it. The air changed. The cold thickened, wrapping around me like fingers. Then came the whisper, not from one voice, from many. "Turn back." I ran. David shouted my name, but I didn't stop. I sprinted forward, deeper into the tunnel, even though I knew I was going the wrong way. The whispers followed, growing louder, filling my head like static. The ground sloped downward. My feet slipped. I hit the concrete hard, the flashlight flying from my hand and spinning wildly, its beam bouncing off the walls. And that's when I saw it. A doorway, not built into the tunnel, just an arch of old bricks standing in the middle of the path. Beyond it, only blackness. Something moved inside it. Not a shape, not a person, just an absence, a void. And it was waiting. I scrambled backward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My flashlight flickered and died. And then David screamed. I don't remember getting out. I don't remember how we found the entrance again, or how I ended up outside, lying on the pavement, gasping for air. David was beside me, pale, shaking, his eyes wide and glassy. Neither of us spoke. We never went back. And we never told anyone what we saw. Because sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still hear it. The breathing. And the whisper. Turn back. It started with the smell. The apartment building wasn't great, old, creaky, with walls so thin you could hear your neighbors breathe. But it was cheap, and in the city, that's all that mattered. I had been living there for about 6 months when the smell started. Rotten. Sour. Like meat left out in the sun. At first, I thought maybe something had died in the walls. A rat, maybe, or a pigeon that got stuck in a vent. But no one else seemed to notice. Not even my next-door neighbor. I knocked on his door one night, the smell so thick I could taste it. He answered, peering at me through the crack. "You don't smell that?" I asked. His face was blank. Smell what? I wanted to push past him, to see inside his apartment. But something about his eyes stopped me. Flat. Empty. Like he wasn't really there. That night, I shoved towels under my door, sprayed air freshener until my throat burned. But nothing helped. Then came the knocking. 3 sharp raps, always at 3:13 a.m. Every night. The first time, I opened the door. No one was there. The second time, I waited. As soon as the knocking stopped, I heard footsteps. Slow, shuffling, moving down the hall. I looked through the peephole. Empty. By the 4th night, I stopped opening the door. But the knocking didn't stop. Then one night, I woke up to something different. Not knocking. Breathing. Right outside my bedroom door. The blankets felt like they were suffocating me, my body frozen beneath them. The breathing was low, wheezing, like something struggling to inhale. I reached for my phone, heart hammering. The breathing stopped. I held my breath. Then, in the dark, the doorknob twisted. I don't remember moving, but suddenly I was across the room, my back pressed against the wall. The knob twisted again, harder. Then came a whisper, right against the door. "Let me in." I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I went to my neighbor's apartment. I needed answers. But when I knocked, the door creaked open. Unlocked. Inside, the smell nearly knocked me over. The air was thick, wet, the walls covered in something dark, something old. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no dishes, no lights. Just the smell. And the walls. They were covered in scratches. Long, deep grooves, as if someone had been trying to claw their way out. Then I saw the door at the end of the hall. My neighbor's bedroom. It was open. And inside, someone was standing there. Not my neighbor. Something else. Tall. Thin. Too long. Its head tilted toward me, though it had no eyes. Just a mouth, open and grinning, whispering the same words, over and over. "Let me in." I ran. I don't remember the stairs. I don't remember the street. All I know is I left everything behind. My things, my lease, my job. I never went back. But sometimes, at night, in a new city, in a new apartment, far away from that place, I hear it. 3 knocks, and a whisper at the door. "Let me in."